Hello everyone, today I'll tell you how to leave aerated concrete walls without a roof for the winter. Of course it's best to cover the structure completely with a roof, but we all plan for one thing and end up with something a little different. In my case, the minimum plan was to get the structure under a roof, and according to all the pessimistic forecasts, I should have had enough time and money to do it. But I didn't plan for my house to be robbed. I didn't plan to be let down with the flooring, and now I won't have time to get the structure under a roof this year. So what should you do if you have to leave the walls exposed without a roof? The most important thing you need to do is cover all the exposed masonry edges with plastic film around the perimeter so the masonry doesn't get wet. My aerated concrete block has a frost resistance of 100 cycles, meaning you can freeze and thaw it 100 times, and only after that will it start to lose its load-bearing capacity, not lose it completely, but start to lose it. If the aerated concrete block freezes while dry and then thaws, there's nothing to worry about, but if it freezes when it's very saturated with moisture, it can crack. Because water expands when it freezes, you can clearly see how a material gets damaged by the expansion of water during freezing by looking at warm ceramics. Because it has very large cavities inside, if it fills with water and then freezes, it simply gets torn apart. This happens to a lesser extent with aerated concrete blocks, and if we cover the cut edge of the masonry, we can avoid this situation. We also need to cover the windowsill areas, because otherwise we'll get moisture spreading in a radius like this here. If we don't cover the windowsill area, it will keep getting wet. This is how I used film to cover the cut edge of the masonry. This photo shows the aerated concrete block. At first, I pressed the film down with boards, but one evening we had such strong winds that it knocked down trees, and all those boards were blown away completely from here. And it's better to do it properly right away, to press the film down really well so that it doesn't go anywhere over the winter. It's best to store the remaining blocks on pallets and covered with film, because if you leave them on the slab, they get damp. I didn't have time to pour the concrete for the blind area, but I could insulate my future blind area so that the ground under my foundation slab doesn't freeze and frost heaving doesn't occur. I will have an insulated blind area with a width of 1 meter 20 centimeters, which in our region matches the standard ground freezing depth and will almost completely eliminate the possibility of the ground freezing under the foundation. As insulation, I used Penaplex with a thickness of 50 millimeters. It's not necessary to make the entire blind area right away, because for insulation purposes, we're only using Penaplex. Concrete doesn't play a role in this process, so it's not a problem if we haven't poured concrete yet. It's better to insulate the blind area right away. I ran out of Penaplex and I thought it's no big deal. I'll just buy more later and finish it. As a result, by autumn everything was overgrown with grass, and I spent a lot of time clearing all that grass. The grass keeps growing anyway, it starts from the top, it even grows in the sand, it starts growing from the top and from underneath. I have geotextile laid down so that nothing grows from underneath, but grass is such a thing that it starts growing on top, right in the sand. That's why it's better to do the work immediately instead of delaying. I foamed all the joints that formed between the sheets. I also foamed the joint between the blind area and the plinth, as well as the insulation sheets on the plinth. It was very important to foam the joint between the insulation and the drainage well thoroughly, so that the insulation wouldn't be damaged by ultraviolet light. I covered it with a film from the same Penaplex. Since I have an insulated Swedish slab as the foundation, I'll need to come in winter and clear the snow. The slab is almost completely flat, so water doesn't drain off it anywhere, it just pools on the surface, and the 3 millimeters of waterproofing from the first row of blocks doesn't help, so the blocks get wet. You can see that there's a little bit of water, just a few millimeters, and the blocks absorb this water. And in order to prevent the blocks from getting wet when the snow melts on the slab in winter, you'll need to come in the winter and clear all the snow off the slab, removing it completely and throwing it onto the same blind area. If, instead of a slab, you have, let's say, a strip foundation, and there's a large gap between the foundation and the block, and the snow doesn't reach the block, then there's basically no point in removing it from there. So our goal is to make sure the block always stays dry. As an experiment, I'll leave a few blocks on the surface so they get as wet as possible, and I'll see what happens to them in the spring. If you, like me, have plumbing that's left outside and not connected to the house, especially if the house doesn't have a roof, you can't use it in the winter, because if water gets stuck here and freezes, it could break the whole structure apart. That's what the purge valve is for, which you open here, and you also need to open it over there. And I was able to blow it out even with a regular bicycle pump. That is, I completely pushed the water out from a depth of 1.5 meters. Right here there's no water left, only air remains and nothing will freeze. As for water drainage, in my drainage system at the moment, I think it's at its maximum, below the level of the cushion. And here's another interesting point that was discovered after 6 months of using the drainage system. Here we have a drainage well, and when there's a downpour, there's a really strong flow of water. Here are the pipes, they fill up with water about halfway, and at the drainage outlet, this pipe at the edge is the one that leads the drainage out. You need to put a cap or some kind of mesh on it, because you can see, yeah, there are a lot of frogs there, a whole pile of frogs. They get in through this outlet pipe, since the drainage outlet leads to the pond, and when the pipe is half filled with water, they climb through it and spread out into all the pipes. I have frogs in every well. So, you need some kind of polymer mesh at the drainage outlet to keep the frogs from getting in, and it should be polymer so it doesn't rot. If you use an iron grate, it will just rot away. It's better to install a polymer mesh, because if something dies here, at least I have access and I can clean it out. But if it dies inside the pipe, and it can, because there were frogs, some of them were as big as a fist, if it dies in the pipe, it will clog the pipe. Here's the middle well, and there are frogs in the middle well too. Look, there's even a small frog there. The only thing is, well, they can't get out when the drainage is working. When the rain stops and the water goes down, they can't get out anymore, because they can't jump through the pipe. This is the upper, driest well. Look, there they are, beauties, just sitting there. I'm going to save them. Plus, I covered all the embedded parts that were left for the foundation with insulation. Here I have a sewer outlet, plus there's a water outlet and another spare one. I'll wrap these embedded parts with something too. So, I covered the edge of the masonry, and I insulated the blind area to the width of the ground's freezing depth. I'll come to clear the snow off the slab. I've blown out the water supply, and I won't be using it. The water in the drainage is at an acceptable level, so in principle everything should make it through the winter without any problems. Well, spring will show how well I did the foundation work. Everything should be fine. I saw an interesting thing about aerated concrete blocks at one of the factories in Germany where they're produced. They put it through all kinds of tests, and one of them is just leaving it outside. There's a block that stood outside, under the open sky, for 20 years, and basically nothing happened to it in all that time, so aerated concrete block is really a very reliable material. Let me show you something interesting. There was a pallet standing here, and nothing happened to it, just as it was unloaded by the crane. It has been standing here ever since. Here's what happened in 4 months. So, the pallet was wooden, it was standing on damp sand and absorbing moisture, since wood gradually absorbs water. Accordingly, if we have capillary rise of water, all this moisture transfers to the block, and a nutrient medium for lichen formed inside the block. That's what happens when blocks stay wet for a long time. That's why, to prevent this from happening to a house, first, there's a film under the cushion, second, a ton of extruded polystyrene insulation, third, a concrete slab, and under the concrete slab, there's also a waterproofing layer. Only after that comes the block, so the block is already quite high above the ground, and that shouldn't happen here. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. See you next time. Subtitles.
Yes, when I go to bed, something comes to my mind. I think I dream. I dream about Velik. But everyone was nervous. My biggest dream is to go to the anniversary. For myself. It's okay, I think I live well. I just want to swim in the sea in Velik.